Yeah. Good morning and welcome from my side on behalf of the Vienna School of International Studies, Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, for this Europe Forum of the AIES. I'm the host here from the Diplomatic Academy, and it's a pleasure to have all of you with us. I am unfortunately sitting at home and not at the Academy due to the COVID situation. The topic of this year is something that has never been as urgent as it is now, and I don't have to introduce you to the issues in detail, but just thinking about this week's situation, especially after the terrorist attack in Vienna, during the counting of the US elections, during a week where once again in the streets of Minsk you had peaceful protests which were beaten up by security forces of the Belarus regime. And just to give you one more example, the fact that President Daci of Kosovo is taken prisoner and has been put to court because of the activities in the late 1990s, gives you some idea why security issues nowadays, European security issues, are on the forefront once again. I do know that this will be a meeting where the different perspectives will try to come together, and as my point of view only, and this is something we discuss with our students quite regularly, I would like to raise this one issue, and this issue is what can we do from the European side in this given situation, and how do we respond? And I do feel from the Austrian point of view, it is of utmost importance that we act also within the reform process of the European Union to make sure that the Conference of the Future of Europe can start as soon as possible, and that in the discussion on the future of Europe, security issues in a broad understanding have a central place, and we will not even refuse to discuss issues like treaty changes in the European Union. So security is, I think, the issue of the day, where we should really make sure that we understand that it is not only coming from outside, but it is something where we Europeans need to act. But having said this, I pass on, because we are here hosting this meeting of minds, but the traditional lead goes with President Werner and the AIES, and I welcome you once again all to this day of discussion of European security. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to welcome you most cordially here at the Vienna School of International Studies as the president of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. I'm very happy that you've come. I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting morning and lunchtime. We will try to discuss several important issues of European security policy. We are meeting under unusual and extraordinary circumstances that have, of course, forced us to design this 24th European Forum in a very special manner. I'm very happy that you've come, that we have so many prominent guests. Before dealing with this issue any further, I would like to ask you, without standing up, just remaining sitting, to think for a moment of the victims of the terrorist attack this week in Vienna and all other victims of terrorist attacks in Europe and beyond, and to commemorate these victims. Thank you. Thank you for your respect, and I would now just say a few words of welcome. Then we will continue with a video message by Minister Klaudia, who cannot be here today. She is busy elsewhere. All the more reason for us to be happy to welcome in person our Minister for European Affairs and Constitution, Karoline EDTSTADLER, and answer a few questions with her. Before we present the video, I would like to say a few words myself regarding Klaudia, who, as I said, cannot be here today, but has sent us a message. As you know, she was born in Lower Austria, in Scheibs. She studied in Vienna. She studied law, worked for several years at the Ministry of the Interior, also in the economy. She was the former director of the Farmers Association in Lower Austria. She was also a member to the Lower Austrian Parliament, and since the last cabinet was formed, she is Minister of Defense of the Republic of Austria. We're looking forward to her video message.
I'm sorry, but I cannot hear the video. Ladies and gentlemen,
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren,
ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased that I can take part in the European Forum of the IISS, albeit only virtually. Much has happened in the short time since I've become minister, and I want to benefit from this opportunity to give you a brief overview of the orientation of our national defense. Ladies and gentlemen, the Austrian army is in the middle of a big leap towards modernization and progress. And we also have to rethink in several areas. The corona crisis has shown us how important it is to have an efficient army endowed with an appropriate budget. Therefore, I'm very pleased that we were able to increase the budget of our army twice in a row. Next year, we'll have an increase by 8.9%, so that we will have the highest budget in our history. And these funds are urgently needed because we have to invest a lot. For example, in the militia, the first deployment of the militia in the history of our republic has demonstrated how important it is. It has to be well-equipped, fast to deploy, and well-trained, and able to act jointly with regular soldiers. We were able to score a few successes in this context. We have already implemented a 200 million euro package for the equipment and training reform, and further investments will have to follow. Major procurement projects are on the agenda right now. Just think of our helicopters. The first Leonardo helicopters will arrive in Austria in 2022 with around 300 million euro. This is the biggest acquisition of the past 20 years. But also for modern threats such as cyber defense, drone defense, or counterterrorism, we will have to make investments. So there is much left to do. Also at the international level, for us, European security is of great importance. it is clear to all of us the previous geopolitical order is changing, which will mean that tried and tested geopolitical strategies and balances will no longer apply, and Europe has to prepare for a world in transition. For Austria, the EU is and will always be the key framework for all security policy activities. In particular, the real challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic made it abundantly clear that an invisible enemy, the virus, affects us all over the world. The geopolitical consequences are not yet visible as yet. The European foreign security and defense policy unquestionably is of high importance in this context. This importance has even increased, and this is demonstrated by the very fact that the new EU Commission made security and defense a major objective. Ladies and gentlemen, wherever more collective responsibility is needed for future crises, the EU is called upon to achieve the objective of a stronger EU in the world. We doubtlessly need to step up cooperation. In line with our common values, however, we must not tire of committing to strong multilateralism. For a strong and strategically autonomous EU, we need clear and well-functioning structures. We need more cooperation within the EU and in particular with our neighboring countries, so that we effectively create security and raise the performance of European security and defense structures. It is only in this way that we can be understood by the citizens of the Union. This in particular applies in the times of Corona, where national defense budgets will come under special pressure. We need to identify the new threats that affect all member states. Therefore, we fully support the work on the strategic compass. This compass is to answer the question of who and what Europe needs to defend itself against. Important issues for Austria are, first, that the effectiveness of EU missions and operations is raised, and second, that the global strategy of the EU dating from 2016 is revised. Ladies and gentlemen, if we want to develop defense capabilities in Europe, we also need a well-functioning CSDP. Austria has taken over an active role in this context and participates in the permanent structured cooperation in 6 out of 47 PESCO projects, in a leading role in one of them. The CBRN surveillance as a service, mobile unmanned aircrafts and ground vehicles supply important data for the troops from a safe distance. This improves the view on the real situation, improve quality, and helps reduce risk for our own soldiers. In PESCO and the EDF, the EU developed instruments for strengthening defense cooperation. The governance will be supported in the coordinated building of lacking military capabilities in order to respond best to future challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, Austria has taken part in military missions in the Western Balkans for good reasons, because security and stability in this region are a basic requirement for a safe, secure Austria and a secure Europe. The Western Balkans still is of top priority for Austria, and we are one of the strongest supporters of the Western Balkan states on the way to the European Union. Austria also plays a major role in the stabilization of the Western Balkans. We are actively involved in missions of the EU, the UN, and NATO in order to avoid international conflicts, to stabilize the situation and provide humanitarian assistance. Currently, 859 Austrians are involved in 16 missions. Austria plays a leading role in the stabilization of the Western Balkans. Austria contributes currently 318 soldiers to the KFOR mission in Kosovo, followed by 306 to EUFOR Althea in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and 182 soldiers to UNIFIL in Lebanon. At present, Austria provides the biggest contingent within the EU mission, EUFOR Althea, and shows above average commitment, and that will remain so for the foreseeable future. But also in Georgia, Austria will maintain its presence. We will also continue the mission in Cyprus, in the Western Sahara, Senegal, and Afghanistan. The Austrian army also makes a contribution to CSDP, significant contribution to CSDP by deployment of 13 persons in Mali. Again, we will take the command in this region in 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, in concluding, I want to emphasize that the importance of European security and defense policy is great, not only in the regions mentioned before. Recent conflicts, such as the one in the Eastern Mediterranean, Nagorno-Karabakh, the political instability in Belarus, and continuing persisting problems in Eastern Ukraine demonstrate that security issues are of high priority. Security and defense policy will certainly increase in importance for Austria and the European Union. We need a stronger EU in the world.
Ja, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren,
ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Federal Minister Tanner, for her contribution. And I'm also happy about several statements she made. We have succeeded in getting an increase in the defense budget for 2 years in a row. Of course, there is much room for improvement, but it's a welcome sign. The development is going into the right direction. I'm also highly pleased that the European security and defense policy has been mentioned, and we now have our European minister here with us. Welcome once more. I would like to add something. It's again and again, it's a pleasure to see how a young personality, she still has a three as the first digit of her age. It will change within the foreseeable future, but she was born in Salzburg, attended secondary school there and studied law at the university in Salzburg. She worked as a judge before being called to Vienna to the Federal Ministry of Justice. She worked there for some time and moved on to policy making. She was a Secretary of State in the Ministry of the Interior, was elected to the European Parliament as the leading candidate of her party, and then she served in the Chancellery as a minister and became Minister for the EU and the Constitution. So please welcome, together with me, Minister Karoline EDTSTADLER. Please give us your statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Werner FASSLABEND, for these very appreciative remarks, because I always like to be here. Remember, I was here last time here when I was a member of the European Parliament. I would also like to welcome the director of the Vienna School of International Studies, Emil, BRIX, and you, ladies and gentlemen. The moment of remembrance, silence at the beginning of this conference, in this nearly empty hall with these few seats, all this shows us that we're now living a very difficult situation. On the one hand, there is, of course, the pandemic, but also at the same time we had the terrorist attack at the heart of Vienna this week, something that has left us all shattered. Yet 2020 would be a year that offers many occasions to rejoice. There are many anniversaries this year. On the one hand, it was 70 years ago that Robert Schuman, in his speech to European countries, to form the European Union through the European Coal and Steel Union. Also, Austria has been, this year, has been 25 years a member of the European Union. And I would also like to mention another anniversary that perhaps was forgotten this year, because Ludwig van Beethoven was born 250 years ago. And after all, it's his 9th symphony in minor, D minor, which is used, part of the fifth movement, with the words of Friedrich Schiller, Ode to Joy, which is the European anthem. But all these aspects, all these events of the last week have thrown the strengths and weaknesses of the European Union into sharp relief. And I think in these very challenging times, it's worthwhile looking back to history in order to learn, to draw lessons from history, and at the same time to look towards the future in a more visionary and positive manner. Now, permit me a short retrospective. Europe's history has been marked by war and famine. Think about the 30 Years' War, which decimated the European population by nearly 1/3. If we think of the First World War, where millions lost their lives in the trenches, and let's think of the Second World War, where the outrages perpetrated by the National Socialist regime left a permanent dark shadow on the history of also this country. Yet, this was also one of the reasons why the European government said we need a European Convention on Human Rights, because this was an absolute novelty, and all these happened in order to prevent the occurrence of such outrages in the future. On 4th November 1950, 70 years ago, the European Convention on Human Rights was put up for signing in Rome, and I, in fact, worked for 2 years at the European Court of Human Rights as an international expert, deployed by the Austrian Ministry of Justice, a great honor for me. The convention is part of the foundation on which we have built our European cooperation. In 1958, Austria acceded to the convention and also elevated to constitutional status in 1964. This means that we are in a unique position among the 47 member states of the European Council. We are the only country where the convention is part of the constitution. And Austria has always played a central role in developing and strengthening European values. Austria always stands for peace and cohesion within this continent. First thesis: Austria needs Europe, and Europe, I think, needs Austria as well. The terrorist attack of 2nd November, a few days ago, was an attack to these rights and liberties, our democratic institutions, and this terrorist attack was meant to shatter our trust in these institutions. But I repeat, we will oppose this. We will not permit that our society be in any way impressed by terror. No. We will not destroy or break up our social life. Now we must create a sense of security in people, especially here in Vienna. The trust of people must be strengthened and repaired in those fields where it's been perhaps damaged. And the achievements of Austria and of the European Union must be further developed. Europe and Austria can, shall, and must be a pioneer in the further development of democratic institutions and anchoring these fundamental values among the members of society. The terrorist attack has shown us that we are not an island of the blessed. Terror has arrived in Austria, a neutral country, something that has never happened before. But it's also shown us that our police did react quickly. They were quickly on site. And we also have seen examples of civil courage, of solidarity, and the offer of help, mutual offer of help. People were willing to help each other in this moment. A key point for the security of Europe and Austria is definitely lies, in my opinion, in excellent border control and protection. The objective must lie in protecting the outer borders of the European Union in order to be able to ensure the free movement of persons and goods. I would now like to draw your attention to the migration package that is currently being discussed by the European Union. In our opinion, in many ways, it goes in the direction that we actually aim at, that is, improved protection of the outer borders, improved cooperation with countries of origin and third countries, and providing also, thirdly, providing more assistance on site. Now, a few remarks regarding the recent catastrophes that we've seen, for example, in Greece. Austria has always been solidary. Austria has contributed tremendously to the migration crisis in 2015, 2016. For example, Austria has dealt with more than 200,000 claims for asylum and granted positively 120, dealt with 200,000 and accepted 120,000 refugees. But of course, we also have to lay down a red line, so to speak. That is, we reject the compulsory distribution of refugees across Europe, because we want to be able to live our freedom in our country. We want people to move freely throughout Europe, and we believe that compulsory distribution of refugees would be counterproductive towards this goal. Now, a second aspect that has come to the foreground in view of the pandemic, I want to talk about health policy. This is, of course, a national competence and responsibility, where it's become clear during the crisis that the principle of subsidiarity is paramount, because the corona crisis did not break on all countries in Europe. It erupted differing intensity and at different moments across Europe, and therefore it was important that the European countries were able to react according to their degree of being affected. Now, many months after the outbreak of the pandemic, we have to coordinate our work better. We've learned much about the virus. We also need to create more trust regarding the effectiveness of the measures taken between the European countries. We need this trust because we must avoid the chaos which existed at the beginning of the crisis. The European Union is an economic space that an area that is so closely interlinked that many people cannot imagine national borders, where people live across borders, have their families, their work across borders, and therefore we need a coordinated action at the European level. Austria was one of the first member states to demand this. 2 weeks about, we negotiated at the European Council of Heads of State and Government how we can develop targeted criteria in order to identify the risk of infection in the various parts of Europe, because we have to protect the health of our citizens, but at the same time, traveling, economy, and the expression of basic liberties and freedoms must be possible. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the historical moment where we have to think about how we want to design the European Union in the future. How should we interact? What should the European Union do? And what is better to be dealt with in the member states according to the principle of subsidiarity? And therefore, the conference on the future of Europe is very important. For me, it should have started, of course, in May of this year. This was postponed due to the pandemic. Now, negotiations have started at strongly advocate that this conference should take place. I advocated this before the pandemic, and I do so now, because it is all about trust involving citizens, asking them, in your opinion, what are the answers that have not been provided? What are the solutions that are lacking? And when I address one of these issues, I want to underline that it is the citizens that have asked me. I've been moving through and traveling through Austria since June with the Austrian dialogue, and have engaged in direct contact with citizens, with municipal representatives, local authorities. How do you imagine the future of Europe? And some of the questions that were raised are the following. First, how can we step up tourism while preserving our identity? How can we benefit from the internal market without losing workplaces to other countries? How can we promote medical research without losing regional doctors and physicians in rural countries? And how can we promote digitalization that has assumed an even more important role during the pandemic without losing tax returns of giants, economic giants, to the United States without earning anything? And also, how can we live Christian solidarity while at the same time protecting our borders against clandestine and illegal migration? And another question, especially in view of the terrorist attack, how can we remain cosmopolitan without forgoing our own values.
So
there are many thematic challenges involved, but also we have to ask ourselves, how can the institutions of the European Union cooperate better in the future? How can we involve citizens in a more effective manner? And this is important for institutions like yours, IISS. How can we position Europe in the world between China on the one hand and the US on the other hand? In these days, we're experiencing, living a US election that could not have been more exciting and conflicting. I have full trust in the democratic institutions in the US, and I'm looking forward to a president. I hope there will be a president who is able to reunite a divided country. A president is willing to cooperate smoothly with Europe. A president that wants to cooperate, because we also need a unified United States, and we need good connections with the US in order to work together. Also towards human rights. The objective must lie in an effective positioning of Europe, but we must also get close to people and develop a resilient and independent European Union that should minimize bureaucracy. We must strengthen trust in the European Union, and we must really think of our values much more than in the past. At the same time, we must not give room to hate and hatred. And especially in these days and weeks, especially I'm concerned with this also in both at the platform of responsibility on the one hand. In everyday life, we need courageous answers for the future, because the European Union is not in Brussels or in Strasbourg. It is situated precisely where are the problems, where people are. Europe is happening now, and we are Europe. So please, I would like to invite you to join forces with the federal government to embark on this road towards an open discourse, to remain open towards changing and processes. I promise you that it will be an open and honest partner. It's about our future and the future of our children and grandchildren. We have to defend this from now. Thank you very much.
Frau Bundesministerin, für diesen Vortrag, für diese
Thank you very much for your contribution, for
und Feststellung, dass Sicherheit
stating that security has many dimensions, not just one. It's an integral concept. It covers border protection, internal security, and on to health and the cultural values. Thank you for that and for your committed voice. For Europe, I would like to ask you one or two questions, and this is where I would like to start.
Wie sieht denn die Rolle Europas eigentlich wirklich aus in der Zukunft? Wir erleben, dass Amerika zweifelsohne den Gipfelpunkt seiner Macht bereits überschritten hat. Wir erleben, dass China ständig stärker wird und ständig mehr Aktivitäten setzt, auch in Europa, und zwar wirtschaftlich, politisch, in vielen Dimensionen. Und es wurde gerade angesprochen, die Frage der Werte,
the question has also been raised of the values, the importance of freedom and democracy. What is the role of Europe between the US and China? How can we actually find the right way and the right place between these superpowers? That's one of the big challenges. To position Europe between China and the US as a political actor. I would like to tell you a story that happened before the pandemic. I was in Washington in early March, and I talked to many people about the role of Europe. And again, the question came up, who do I call when I want to learn about the position of Europe? And that actually says it all. We need to play a strong role externally and need to position ourselves as a strong international leader. This is also related to the problem that we have the principle of unanimity. Sometimes it's difficult to find majorities in decision-making, and it's even more difficult to achieve unanimity. In the world market, we can only act when we join forces. For example, the joint procurement during the pandemic and the shutdown. While Europe was shocked, we tried to place orders together because we saw that when orders for a few 100,000 masks are placed by France or Austria, it's nothing, it's peanuts in comparison with orders placed by the US. I also have to add that Austria is seen positively also in the US. This has to do with the contacts expanded in the US by Chancellor Kurz. We need the US as a partner, especially in the context of defense policy. We certainly have to become more active, even though Austria is already active, as Minister Tanner told us, plays an active role. The President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, stated at the start of her term that the foreign and security policy is to be strengthened. How far have we moved in this respect? There are already several sobering comments in this respect. The Berlin Institute of the SPD stated that we are not moving towards that objective. What is your opinion about the development of the common foreign and external and foreign and security policy? This is why I think that it's very important to launch the Conference on the Future of Europe, because there's still a lot of work to be done. We must not forget that the pandemic meant that a lot of work had to be done, and that decision-making meetings have been, we had meetings postponed and meetings held video links, so it's more difficult to communicate. And of course, several issues move to the background. I always advocate to think beyond the pandemic and think about what we can do to be in a better position after the pandemic. We have a lot of problem fields in foreign policy. Just think of Turkey, Nagorno-Karabakh, but the European Union as a whole can provide a strong stability anchor to that region. But when we move closer to our neighborhood, I'm talking about the Western Balkans, Austria has always advocated to start the accession process in order to offer a credible perspective for those countries. The Western Balkans need to be approximated to the values of the European Union. This process is not easy, and it's not easy to advocate it at the level of the European Union. I visited a total of 10 countries, and even countries, especially countries that are farther away, they do not have a good understanding of the countries of the Western Balkans. Therefore, it's I consider it a task of Austria to advocate an accession process that needs to be advanced. But these countries also face major challenges. They need to engage in reforms for the European Union and especially for us, as we are in close proximity to those countries. It will improve the security of our countries. But we still have a long way to go. You perfectly summarized that. We have a long way to go. Europe is a still very imperfect political player. I have the following question. Which role can Europe play? For example, at the periphery, we have the situation in Libya, in the Caucasus. We have crisis in Ukraine. In spite of all the limited possibilities of the common foreign and security policy, are there options and opportunities for Europe to take action? Well, I can only remember what I've stated before. This pandemic was a great shock to all of us. I had many discussions in video conferences also with commissioners, especially with the commissioners in charge of migration policy. And I arrived at the conclusion that we need to act as responsible partners in these regions. And this brings me back to the migration package. It includes many measures that have to do with the foreign policy of the Europe, support on site, coordination with third countries, the transfer of know-how in order to enable the people to build up their countries. We have a morally responsible as Europe. There are millions of refugees all over the world, and it's impossible that we accept them all in Europe, but we can contribute to improving the framework conditions in those countries where the refugees are. And that's also support for the migration policy. We need to move ahead with the migration package and achieve an agreement. You already mentioned the conference on the future of Europe. Could you please tell us more about that? What are the intentions behind it? What are the perspectives? And what objectives should be achieved? Many questions that I can answer for Austria, but are not answered in Europe, because this process has not been launched yet. From my perspective, the basic intention of the conference is to get in touch with the citizens and to hear their views about the future of Europe. In Austria, I would like to draw up a non-paper that lists the issues of the Austrian citizens. To be launched during the German presidency. Because of the pandemic, it's rather difficult. The question is who is to chair the conference. We are in the middle of the trialogue, and there are a lot of detailed questions that are not yet decided at the European level. But I know that many people look to Europe because I've been engaging in this process since July, and I hope that some try to follow our example for the activities in their member states. Thank you very much. Also for these European words about the perspectives and everything that is unclear in Europe. And there's a lot that is still unclear and that has to be defined more precisely. Thank you very much once more. Before leaving, we would like to point out something. Our institute is a member of Eurodefense. That's an organization in the field of security and defense policy. that
in der Mehrzahl der europäischen Staaten, der Mitgliedsländer der Europäischen Union existiert, und wir beschäftigen uns
most of the EU member states. We intensively focus on the future development of the security and defense policy. Yesterday we held a conference that should have been organized in conjunction with our conference today. We also had to hold it virtually. We adopted a paper yesterday on the future of defense policy. We would like to hand over this paper to you. I would like to address a few issues. Some of them are looking far ahead into the future. We are well aware of the fact that some of these points cannot be implemented in the near future, but in general, the aim is to have a proactive security and defense policy. For example, by adopting a European defense doctrine at the European level that defines not only where we stand today, but also what should be defended, and so that we at least talk about whether we need unanimity for all the decisions, or whether it shouldn't be possible to have a qualified majority vote if we need a rapid response. I know that this is a difficult issue, but at least we should discuss it. We also discussed that there should something like a European Security Council in order to engage on the problems arising on an ongoing basis. We should also have a security white paper at the European level, and we also made several proposals on how the structure should evolve in the future within the framework of the European Union. For example, that there should be an operational headquarter, that is a permanent command structure, in order to be able not only to prepare missions, but also to gather experiences. And for this reason, you need an institution that can focus on this. Of course, we also discussed financial aspects today. We do not want to keep you busy with that, because you have a lot of items on your agenda. We would like to hand over this paper to you. It was also sent to the official institutions of the European Union, to the President of the Council, the President of the Commission, and the President of the Parliament, as well as to the High Representative. Being our European Minister, I would like to hand it over to you as well, so that you can address the issues also at the European level. Thank you very much for your commitment. We would like to hand over this paper. It will be done by Magister Sikanel, who was also a member of our working group. At the same time, we would like to thank you for being with us. We also benefit from this opportunity to take a picture.
Ist es möglich, dass wir vor dem AIS stehen, dass wir das richtige Bild haben? Vielleicht auf der Seite. So, ja.
Dankeschön.
Ja. So.
Thank you.
Okay, für eine ruhige Stunde. Okay.
Danke vielmals.
So. Wir können uns zwar nicht die Hand geben, aber
We cannot shake hands, but thank you very much for coming,
für dein Engagement und
for your commitment, and we wish you all the best.
Okay.
Name vielleicht ohne.
Okay.
And once, another picture.
So. Okay. Aha.
Sind live.
Ja, das geht. Okay, so viel Zeit muss sein.
Das hätten wir beim Live-Event auch, oder?
Ja, so ist es. Hätten wir beim Live-Event auch.
Dankeschön.
Dankeschön und weiterhin viel Erfolg.
Danke. Guten Verlauf der Veranstaltung wünsche ich in digitaler Form.
And I wish you a lot of success for the continuation of this conference.
So, meine Damen und Herren, wir
Ladies and
machen
gentlemen,
ein paar Minuten und zwar 10
we'll have
Minuten
a
Pause
10
und
minutes
setzen dann
break
fort.
and we'll then continue with our next item on the agenda. Thank you.
Warte, ich gehe noch schnell in Okay. Yeah.
Well.
Ready? To keep saying. Okay. Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now continue our program.
That we can continue our conference just in this moment. We will have an interesting panel. Two people are present, two will come by video, and I'm sure this will be altogether quite an interesting moment because we have prominent speakers. First of all, it will be Mikuláš DZURINDA. He is the former Prime Minister of Slovakia. He is the man who was in different ministerial functions as Minister for Traffic. He was Minister for Foreign Affairs, and especially he was the Prime Minister of Slovakia between 1998 and 2006. He was the man who led Slovakia in a very difficult situation into EU and into NATO, and therefore he really knows about difficult situations in political situations, and especially also how important this security dimension is for the overall situation of a state. We will ask him to start, and please, Mikuláš, if you start out.
Thank you very much, dear Werner. Thank you for your kind words, but even more for our long-lasting friendship. Before jumping to the issue, I'd like to express my solidarity and solidarity of all Slovak people, because not only because of that, we are the neighbors, and we have been thinking very deeply in recent times regarding this horrible terrorist attack in Vienna. So a special condolences and solidarity should be devoted to the survivors of this, of the victims of this horrible event. At the beginning, I'd like to express also my gratitude that we can continue with this conference. This is already the 24th edition, and I think that continuity is needed and very important. And now allow me to go to the issue. When speaking about the status quo of the European defense policy, we can choose generally between two approaches. The first is more technical or administrative, but we have also another option to go to the issue more politically, taking into account the situation in our neighborhood and also beyond. When it comes to the first approach, I would say formal or administrative assessment, I would characterize it as the fine-tuning and operationalizing the new system that has gradually emerged since 2016 and includes initiatives such as PESCO, Permanent Structured Cooperation, the European Defence Fund, the Coordinated Annual Review on Defence, and military mobility. There is also another special instrument which is called Strategic Compass. The European External Action Service is currently preparing a common threat analysis which will be presented to EU defense ministers in the Council just in November this month. This analysis will serve as the foundation for the actual strategic compass, which seeks on different priorities, but I believe it is not needed to lose time to speak about them. what is important is the fact that the updated strategic compass will be developed in 2021 and then adopted during the French EU Council presidency in 2022. So it is important that there are instruments how to measure the progress and how to check the road map on which we are walking. I'd like to stop maybe a bit with PESCO, Permanent Structured Cooperation. Since its activation in 2017, the member states have launched a total 47 concrete projects in its framework. And this is tangible. This is something very, very concrete. These projects focus on joint capability development in training, land, maritime, aerospace, cyber, and enabling areas. The EU is currently conducting a strategic review of PESCO, which should be finished by the end of this year. And just in these days, maybe yesterday, you could read in Politico or in some other media that a consensus has been reached among the PESCO members to invite or to facilitate also participation of the third countries. So the US, the UK, not Turkey, but our friends and allies from US and UK are welcomed and enabled to participate. The EU is also continuing to hold discussions on the further development and operationalization of the Article 42, paragraph 7 on the EU treaties, which is dealing with mutual assistance clause, which had been used or invoked only once in 2015 by France. So one would say, looking at the issue of defense and all relevant issues, that, okay, there is a schedule, there is a plan, there is a timetable, and everything is okay. I mean that to some extent it is true, but I'd like to be honest and to share with you my political instinct or political feeling looking at the situation and to deal with the issue more politically now. If I should characterize my political perception in this respect, I would say that the EU is slowly but surely losing its authority and respect. It is maybe a bit brutal, but I don't like to lose a lot of time. I'd like to prop up or to bolster this statement by a few illustrations, if you allow. For instance, the EU has no say in the Middle East, especially when it comes to Syria and all relevant developments. The EU is unable to prevent Turkey from drilling for gas and oil in the waters of Cyprus, in the Eastern Mediterranean. EU has a very limited influence on Turkey, threatening Greece, I would say, on a daily basis. EU doesn't belong to the stakeholders shaping the development in Libya, even though Libya is a crucial reservoir of illegal immigrants to Europe. EU has nothing to say in the recent war about the Nagorno-Karabakh. Look at the language used by Erdogan vis-à-vis the French President Emmanuel Macron after the brutality of the Islamic terrorists in France. This language represents something as a very cold icing on the cake of the EU authority. Helplessness of the EU cannot be characterized better than by the statement of the President of the EU Council, Charles Michel, who finished his statement as his reaction, or Erdogan, with the shout, "Respect for Europe and its member states." But Charles Michel should be aware of the fact that respect is not possible to beg or to buy, as we try to do with respect to immigration. Respect can only be enforced or well-earned, thanks to our strength, thanks to our deterrence, or concrete results achieved at home or abroad. I followed this situation for many, many years, and maybe my view is not the best one, but it seems to me that sometimes must be changed in our approach to security and defense. By my mind, we need to accelerate our work not only on PESCO, Defense Fund, but on the European Defence Union as such. Fully respecting the subsidiarity principle, security in general and defense in particular should be taken and perceived as an area best performed together. That means at the communitarian level. We need to respond to main security threats together, not individually. Well, good news is that the EU countries, NATO members, are increasing their military spending in 2020, comparing with 2019, with the only one exception, Bulgaria. But it is not good if over-indebted Greece, in time when we want to cooperate better, in time of enhanced cooperation, in time of the defense fund, is compelled to buy 18 new fighters, new helicopters, and other armaments, when the country is forced or compelled to increase the number of soldiers of 15,000 to be able to evade Turkish threats. Sweden, another example. Sweden has announced a massive plan to boost its military forces. It comes amid growing tensions with Russia, which Sweden accused several times in recent years of violating its airspace and waters. If I am not mistaken, the Swedish government very recently has decided to increase the budget for 2021-2025 of 40%, the biggest increase since 1950, since the end of the Second World War. Well, Sweden is not a NATO member, but it is the EU member. I strongly believe the EU must respond to the threats of any of its members collectively, together. There is a man whose name is Benjamin Haddad. He is the analyst of the Atlantic Council, and this gentleman said very recently during the GLOBSEC conference in Bratislava, I believe you know the conference, that he believes the EU should preserve its current diversity, but at the same time is also able to stand up to Russia and China. He is saying that without strong union, the Europe will only be a land which will be parceled out by the world powers. There is also a brutal expression, but I understand what is behind. More or less, this is a right diagnosis. If it is so, it is clear that we need a recipe how to respond to it. One is coming just now from Berlin in these days. Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, the defense minister in Germany, pronounced on October the 23rd, on the occasion of the presentation of the Stoiben-Schurz Media Award in Frankfurt, apart from the others, these words. I will briefly quote. We, it means Europeans, cannot provide our own nuclear deterrence, nor do we want to. This is why America must remain by our side and protect us. At the same time, we, Europeans, will have to do ourselves much of what America has largely done for us so far, by diplomatic and by conventional military means. Securing NATO's eastern flank, crisis management operations in our immediate neighborhood outside of Europe, air and sea surveillance. The end of quotation. So, my dear friends, I am very close to this description or vision. And I believe that such a vision could be or should be materialized or implemented. The logical question now is how to launch such an implementation. Where to start? Where to begin? What should be changed? What should be something like a game changer if we want to change the status quo? And I indicate very strongly that I agree with this, that we need something like a game changer, not a revolution, but a game changer. So I mean, we need to start with the decision-making in the area of the European foreign and security policy. We need to move from consensus decision-making to voting. A few days ago, I read an interview with Romano Prodi. Apart from other things, he said, the bloc, it means the EU, is economically strong, but politically so divided, it faces the incredible absurdity of having Turkey and Russia as almost exclusive players in the Mediterranean policy. That is because there is only one enemy to Europe. Not Russia, not China, not the EU. Europe's enemy is unanimity. So I agree with my old friend Romano Prodi. This is also something which I feel very strongly, that this is the issue which should be changed, with which we should launch maybe a new era in defense. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation and for this really remarkable speech, which shows very clearly not only that you are handling such questions in a very frank and open way, your personal experience as foreign minister, prime minister, and also as the president of one of the top 10 worldwide, top 10 think tanks, the Martens Center. Thank you so much for your analysis, and I'm sure we will try to bring you more often to Vienna in order to give us some impulses in order to develop politics furthermore. Thank you so much, Mikuláš DZURINDA. I now will change into German language because the next speaker will do it, his speech in German language. Und ich begrüße
I would now like to welcome
Lukas MANDL.
Our next speaker, Mr. Lukas MANDL. Lukas MANDL is a young man. He's a member to the European Parliament, and yet he may look back to a rich political experience. He studied communication sciences, read at the University of Business Administration here in Vienna. He started a parliamentary career indirectly as part of the staff of the Member of Parliament Gerhard Bruckmann, whom some of you will remember. He was also a local politician in Lower Austria at the municipal level, and since the last European elections, he's member of the European Parliament, as I said, not in just any position, but in the capacity of a member as a vice chair of the Subcommittee on Security and Defense of the European Parliament, and hence his everyday work concerns precisely these issues, nuts and bolts. Together with 27 other members, he must find compromises and solutions to one of the most difficult and complicated areas. Please, Lukas, MANDL, you have the floor. Vielen Dank.
And I will do so, but first of all, I want to thank President DZURINDA for his really clear language he used today and for the outspoken messages you shared with us, and I can underline each and everything you have said, and I try to realize it in my parliamentary work. Since I have the privilege to work as a parliamentarian, and although we are located today in Vienna in the Diplomatic Academy, I take the liberty to speak frank as a parliamentarian, not always diplomatically, while I really adore what diplomats do, but in the 10 minutes I have, I want to speak pretty clear. And I was requested to speak in German, what I will do now. Meine Damen und Herren, wir
Ladies and gentlemen,
befinden uns in einer
we are
Woche,
now
speziell hier
living a week, especially here in Vienna,
die reale Bedrohung
where the real threat
nicht ein Risikoszenario darstellt,
is not a mere risk scenario, but is reality. Due to Islamist terrorism, it has become a sad reality.
befinden uns in einer Zeit, in
We're
der
living in a time when the famous saying,
Economy stupid
"It's the economy stupid,"
dramatische Aktualität bekommt.
is acquiring dramatic topicality.
Europa auf der ganzen
Today,
Welt, auch in
in
Österreich,
Europe and the whole world, in
Menschen
Austria
ihre
too,
Arbeitsplätze verlieren
people lose their
oder sehen, dass ihre
workplaces
Arbeitsplätze gefährdet sind.
or at least see their jobs being threatened. People who are well trained, people who have always worked, who can and want to work, and yet, because we have a total breakdown of the economy, of the purchasing power, of domestic demand, we are experiencing an economic crisis due to the pandemic, which renders this year so
hängen zusammen.
dramatic. And of course, all these elements of risk and threat are interlinked. They share the potential of dividing our societies too, dividing us as human beings.
Für
And this is the worst thing that can happen for the unified Europe that we have accepted from the generations that have come before.
Momente zusammentragen.
And all these elements of danger and risk bear
Ich möchte daher mit Ihnen
the danger, the seed of division.
aber ich möchte ihn wirklich in
I would therefore like to focus on a concept in my presentation that you're aware of, and I want you to operate with this term, with this concept when talking about the security architecture of Europe in the future. Namely, it's strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy is a concept that sounds a bit technical or boring, and perhaps it's not useful for a broad European discussion, but it focuses on what we need in Europe, namely the ability of Europe to help itself in moments of crisis. I have sketched only a few scenarios of crisis, but there are many possibilities. The next big crisis can be a cyber attack, a blackout, threat to infrastructure,
derzeit erleben.
broad-based threat to infrastructure. And of course, we are experiencing an enormous wave of disinformation. This is a kind of a slow fire that is not really high, but still continues on the ground. And this, by and large, contributes very much towards dividing our society, because these campaigns are organized with a lot of the resources because there is a wish to distribute, disseminate false information. This, of course, this is possible with the technical possibilities that we have now. This is why a special committee was set up at the European Union. This committee is mandated for 1 year and is to look at the disinformation by extra-European actors. And I'm very grateful for all indications that help our world work. And I hope that this special committee will lead to statutory measures and to networking between the various member states. I'm confident about that because we need not only to talk about it, also about the actual attacks caused by disinformation, but we also need to draw concrete conclusions from this. President DZURINDA has already mentioned PESCO. And I think it was a great progress for Europe that it has become possible for the member states to cooperate permanently in a structured manner. As President DZURINDA said, there are 47 such missions, initiatives, and another positive development of this week lies on the fact that we've made it very clear that European countries outside the Union can also play a role in PESCO. This is very important, especially towards, of course, towards the United Kingdom, which we have lost as part of the European Union, but we need it for our security architecture. Every day I try to focus on this priority. We need not only talk about economy post-Brexit negotiation. It's not only the economy stupid. Of course, the British economy is very doubly hit by Brexit and the pandemic. But we all in Europe, we are not an island. We have to work together in the field of security policy, and we must not lose the United Kingdom as part of PESCO. Then let's look at Belarus. Let's look at Ukraine, Armenia, Syria, the Mediterranean. And this brings me full circle. We're already at 6 o'clock, half circle at least. And if we look towards the West, transatlantic relations hopefully will improve in the future, and they must improve for our aim of defending democracy, the rule of law, and the freedoms in the future. Because there are parts of the world where our model of living is not accepted, is hated, and they see more possibilities in competition instead of cooperation. I think cooperation is the better thing, human exchange, but there are parts of the world that view their possibilities more, as I said, in competition, and this will unfortunately continue these scenarios of threat. I'm very happy that Minister Tanner has already mentioned that we've increased our investments in the military in Austria. And it's very important for me to, first of all, react to these scenarios of threat. And at the same time, we must not forget that in this very difficult year, 2020, the Austrian Federal Military has contributed tremendously. Also, in the context of the terrorist attack, the army was there to complement the excellent work of the police. And therefore, it was possible to, first of all, kill the attacker in a short time and also work against this network. And of course, it's very important to involve the military in these actions. I'm saying this because in our system of military defense, with also compulsory military service in Austria. We want people to, of course, to accept and understand what the military does. We have great opportunities at the European level. President DZURINDA has already mentioned about the European Defence Union, and in the sense of a shift of paradigms, we have for the first time a European Defence Fund, for the first time probably earmarked with 7 billion euros, and in order to support innovative projects in the military. And this, of course, means also very positive things for the civilian economy and for the labor market. And in areas, in Europe, we have many areas that can do a great deal. This has been demonstrated. The military can do very much, for example, in the context of Horizon 2020, but security research programs have been very important in this context. And in future will be called Horizon Europe. And Austria has, in fact, invested a certain sum, but we have obtained a rate of return of 138%. Because we have participated so much in the innovative sector, and I think we can do the same thing with the European Defence Fund, where also the return can be perhaps even more improved, and at least will exceed what we have paid into the European Europe. And of course, it means also great benefit for the civilian economy, because all the innovation that is done, the development work also, of course, is to the benefit for everyday goods, everyday consumers. Let me conclude with two ideas. First of all, we in Europe are actually consuming, so to speak, top-edge technology that was invented in the US or in Asia and is produced in Asia. And we pay for that. This is due to the past 2 or 3 decades when the development was thus. And of course, I find a global economy better than a cooperative one, than a competitive one. But we as Europeans cannot live only off consumption. Therefore, the top technology that is possible here in Europe, in Austria, we have excellent enterprises here, and we must make them activate them, must make them come to bear. For example, we spend a great deal of money for research for the research sector from the government. In the United States, this percentage is even 60%. And as Paulo Coelho once wrote, everything is interlinked. Jobs are something, of course, that are very important in this labor market, in the economic crisis, and they're very closely linked to the military. I want to work for a Europe that is stronger towards the world outside, and at the same time freer towards the interior. And it is along these principles that I want to work, and I hope that we can make use of the possibility that results from the European Defence Fund. But this was what I focused on today. And as I said, Horizon 2020 has provided many opportunities, and I think we must continue this on a collaborative basis in Europe. Because we support each other, Europe will become stronger towards the world outside. Because on paper, the sum of all investments makes Europe as strong or perhaps stronger than the US. But we're still light years away from the US capacity because we're not sufficiently networked. We can be better networked through the Defense Fund, through PESCO, and through the basic attitude, as President DZURINDA said, we belong together and have to become stronger towards the world outside for future generations and the fundamental values that we represent. Thank you very much, Mr. MANDL, for your very clear words. also for mentioning two very important concepts. First, as you said, strategic or defense autonomy. This is enormously important as an objective to make sure that Europe will not get stuck in the middle, so to speak, but rather be able to overcome crises and menaces independently. This is not a question, of course, that can be resolved in a short time, but will take longer. But it is an objective that we have to address if Europe is to be a credible player on the world stage. Second point that you mentioned is the technological aspect. This seems very important to me because the field of arms and defense industry, this sector, is a technological leader worldwide. Is in fact decisive. Many technological developments are created or evolved by the military, by military research, and therefore we must get away from the small-scale thinking and rather embrace a common European arms and defense market, because the units themselves would be much too small to stand alone. And as you said, as compared to China, the US, we are not competitive. And we will become even less competitive in the future. So if Europe wants to keep its technological leadership, then we must cooperate in the field of technological defense technology through a common market and creating common functionalities and dimensions in order to remain competitive. And now let me switch back to the English language.
The language is that we now will have the contribution of two people from outside, one from United Kingdom and one from France. Both are outstanding, really outstanding academics. And the first one I want to present will be Franz-Stefan GADY from the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London. He himself will be in this moment in America, and therefore please understand if there's a little time difference between his speech and maybe the language, because of course it is quite a distance to transport the words from the United States here to Vienna. On the other hand, we also have the opportunity maybe to hear from him what will be the consequences of President Biden instead of President Trump, maybe for European security, for European and American cooperation. Please go forward with Franz-Stefan GADY and his contribution.
Yes, hi. Good morning to Europe. I'm actually calling in not from London, but from New York City. As you might be aware, we are a bit preoccupied with other issues here besides European defense policy. So I really appreciate it that I can focus for a few hours on not who's going to occupy the White House in a few weeks from now, but on actually some quite substantial issues pertaining to Europe's security and European defense policy. And I was listening with great interest to some of the remarks my other fellow panelists have been making, and maybe just to pick up on some of the stuff that has been said already. I obviously fully agree with Lukas MANDL's statement that we need the ability for Europe, or the capability for Europe to help itself. And what he mentioned also, cyber capabilities, and the fact that Austria has increased defense spending, and also a brief mentioning of the recent horrible terrorist attack. And perhaps here are a couple of points right from the top. I do think that we have to move beyond in our debate just thinking about singular capabilities when it comes to defense in Europe. So when you mention cyber capabilities, you can't really mention cyber capabilities alone without not also talking about other stuff, such as electronic warfare capabilities, the electromagnetic spectrum. And what I'm really aiming here at is this idea of the future of military power is really going to be all about integration in different platforms, different systems, different networks across all the domains. So I really encourage all the policymakers to move away from this idea of singularly focusing now on, let's just say, cyber alone and put a lot of money into cyber and then really neglecting other aspects of defense. Having said that, my second point that also just popped up because Lukas mentioned the additional investments in Austria, and I think that's very good and I think that's very fair to mention. But again, those investments have to be made with a little bit more thought about integrating capabilities here again, because no matter what investment you can make now in the Austrian Bundesheer, for example, and that goes really for all the other militaries in Europe, it's virtually meaningless in 2020 if you don't have strong capabilities, again, in the electromagnetic spectrum, if you don't have strong capabilities when it comes to offensive and defensive cyber capabilities. It's meaningless if you don't have a concept how to effectively integrate legacy platforms, such as, for example, main battle tanks, with emerging new technological capabilities, such as AI-enabled intelligence tools or AI-enabled precision strike capabilities. As the recent conflict in Armenia and Azerbaijan has shown, it's exceptionally important to acquire precision strike capabilities for European militaries. And since the terrorist attack in Vienna was also mentioned during the remarks, I think strong intelligence capabilities are increasingly going to be more important also for any form of future military power. And that specifically goes for cyber capabilities, because if you don't have strong intelligence capabilities, if you don't have strong signal intelligence, for example, it's impossible to effectively mount an effective cyber defense. So if the Austrian government, for example, says, or any other government in Europe says, we're going to put up strong cyber defenses, the first thing that I would encourage you to look at, how good are their intelligence agencies? What sort of signals intelligence capabilities do they have? If they don't, then this investment also is partially meaningless, in my opinion. And then the other point that has been mentioned, and since I'm sitting here in the early morning hours in New York City, transatlantic relations. And I think this is going to be hugely important. And already I heard this idea of strategic autonomy. I also read that op-ed by the German defense minister, and also read yesterday a rebuke of that statement by, I forgot now, I believe it's a member of the European Parliament from the Green Party, who said that it's actually quite dangerous to rely on the United States, or rather the Pax Americana, for future defense. And my answer to that is that strategic autonomy should never, ever come at the expense of stronger US-European ties. At the same time, we should not have any illusion that the United States is not going to refocus or has been refocusing, at least since the Obama administration, its main attention, its main military attention to the Indo-Pacific region. That's not going to change in the near term, and also in the long term, obviously. And so I think it's hugely important also to keep that in mind. And I think it's completely delusionary to talk about strategic autonomy unless we really focus on this concept of nuclear deterrence and who's going to take over that. I mean, I do think we have to be much clearer what we mean by strategic autonomy. And it's not just the nuclear deterrence that should be discussed in this context, but it's also other stuff. Again, coming back to intelligence capabilities during, as a result of I believe, after the Vienna attacks rather, It has been revealed that crucial intelligence has come from the Federal Bureau of Investigation here in the United States. So that already tells you something about intelligence capabilities that are partially need to be developed better in Europe, or specifically in Austria. So all of this together, I think, has to be kept in mind when we talk about strategic autonomy. But it's also other stuff. Again, you know, just munition stocks in Europe that are depleted, precision strike ammunitions, a good integration of UAVs with other sorts of platforms, as we have seen in the Armenia-Azerbaijan war. And I think the most important and the least mentioned aspect at conferences such as these, when it comes to talking about defense policy and future military power and so forth, is training. The core strengths of future military power will be combined arms operations, or as it's now called, multi-domain operations or all-domain operations. This idea of integrating all different domains, all different services, different platforms and so forth, in a way that you simultaneously that you can synchronize operations across all these domains and create something, a synergetic effect in the battle space. And that's going to be hugely important. And this really, though, requires exceptionally well-trained soldiers. And I think one key aspect that we should not underestimate when we talk about defense policy, what can we do in the European Union, what can we do in NATO to just accelerate the training pace of militaries across the board. That alone is going to enhance our capabilities. It's not just the platforms, it's not just technology, it's really training, and it's really the individual, because the future of war, and that's what I'm focusing on mostly at the Institute for International Strategic Studies in London, I mean now from New York, is really this idea that in the future the human operator will remain key to success in the battle space. And let me perhaps stop my remarks here, and maybe we have time for some discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. This really was great that you did take the chance to communicate with us. We are very proud to have this contact, because Franz-Stefan GADY is not only an outstanding academic, but he really also has quite some experience in field research. He was in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and when he now spoke about the combined arms operations and also the need and necessity for well-trained soldiers, he really knows what he is talking about. And insofar, I think this really was very, very important. And thank you also for, of course, hinting at the need for a strong transatlantic link. We come now to the last presenter in this panel.
Well-trained soldiers. He really knows what he is talking about. And insofar, I think this really was very, very important.
Yeah, we now come to the fourth man in this panel, and this will be, and I think it's an absolute need also when we discuss about European security and defense, to get a French voice, to get a voice from Paris, and this will be Daniel Fiot. He studied also in Brussels and in United Kingdom, but he is one of the outstanding academics and also the security and defense editor on the European Institute for Security Studies in France. And insofar, we really are looking forward to his presentation. Please, Daniel, go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can all hear me well and clear. And let me first begin by thanking the organizers for putting together this Europa Forum, which I think, as I've been listening this morning, has already included a number of excellent speakers who have already put the spotlight on a number of key issues and have done so very eloquently. Let me also say that it's an honor to be here on behalf of the EUISS, as the EU's Agency for Foreign Security and Defense Policy Analysis. And I should also say, before giving you some remarks, that you of course all have my deepest condolences for the attacks that took place in Vienna not so long ago. And at least from the outside world, the Austrian authorities seem to perform with a great degree of professionalism and excellence. So on that front, we still wish you well, even though with the pandemic we are separated virtually. Let me begin then by picking up on some of the points. And the title of this panel or this session includes the words status quo. So the status quo in European defense. Which of course is a provocative and good title, I would say. And let me begin by saying that on this issue of status quo, I think from a policy point of view, Europe has not stood still, at least since 2016. Now in 2013, with the former Council President Van Rompuy, he put on the agenda defense in the European Council session, a particular session for defense. And it was very clear, even at that stage, so before Brexit, before the election of Donald Trump, that Europeans needed at the highest level to already invest in EU security and defense. This was already clear. 2016, with the global strategy, it was also very clear there that Europeans had to do more. And why was this the case? Well, the case was very clear. Firstly, financial crisis 2008, the so-called Arab Spring in 2011, which exposed the great weakness in Europe's neighborhood policy. 2014, Russia's seizure of Crimea. 2015, the migration crisis. And then, of course, Brexit in 2016. And then Trump's election at the end of that year. So all of the political elements came together to really force Europeans to think about what more they wanted to do in security and defense. And let me make clear at this stage that when we talk about strategic autonomy in an EU sense, we are not describing the present reality. We are describing a recognition of the fact that in the future, we will be left alone, especially in our neighborhood. We may still have strong partnerships. That's good, that's needed. But ultimately, we have to take on the responsibility for our own security and defense, and more so. And so, with the global strategy, we broke the status quo, it can be said, by the development of new initiatives, and they've already been excellently outlined by previous speakers. PESCO, the European Defence Fund. Maybe also let me flag the Coordinated Review on Defence, the so-called CARD, which is supposed to lead to more synchronization of defence planning. I should also say that we set up at the EU level the first military command centre for our CSDP missions and operations to make them more streamlined and more strategically balanced and guided from the EU level. So from a policy point of view, from mechanisms that have been developed, there is no longer a status quo if one defines the status quo as that which has prevailed since CSDP began. And we have had CSDP for 20 years now. Now here comes the more critical thinking on this. Have we seen in the last few years simply an exercise of running fast, simply to stand still? And by this, I mean, we have all of these new initiatives, we have all of these new buzzwords, but do they make a tangible difference to security and defense in the EU? Well, not overnight, that is for sure. And that is the brutal truth that no amount of strategy documents, no amount of mechanisms can change life or have a revolution or evolution in defense overnight. What they need is long-term commitment by member states. And that is the core principle here in which any discussion about strategic autonomy, capability development rests. We need the member states to continue their support to develop capabilities and also robustness in terms of our international action. That is for sure, especially in the context, as I've said, of maybe not being able to rely on others for security in our neighborhood. Now, the core factor here and the area where we do have still a status quo is on our operational output. Now, what we have done for the last few years has focused a lot on capability development, technology, and that is good and it is much needed. However, we lose sight of the operational dimension. And it is very crucial in the next few years when we develop now this new initiative called the Strategic Compass, that we focus very clearly on how we can improve Europe's ability to act. And I think it is not really disputed from all of the ministerial speeches and op-eds and comments one can hear, it is not really disputed that Europe needs to develop its capabilities and to be able to act more autonomously when it comes to operations. And that is really the main point for what we do here in Brussels, it must be said. It is about improving that operational capacity. But we have lost sight of the importance of operations. And why is this important? Well, if one looks at the 20 years of CSDP, we have shown that Europe has an ability to autonomously deploy civil and military missions and operations. But we also recognize that we have not lived up to the level of ambition of all sorts of crises that we see in our neighborhood, be it Syria, Libya, even further afield. Now, this is important, and we really need to focus on the operational dimension for a particular reason. And that is that we can also become very lazy in thinking that the crisis management environments in which we will deploy in the future will be exactly the same as those environments we deployed in the late 90s, early 2000s. This is not the truth, not reality of today. And basically what that means is that we have to firstly contend, as the previous speakers have already said, in a more technologically advanced dimension, where, for example, not only actors such as Russia, China, and even Turkey will be fielding cutting-edge technologies and denial technologies, but even terrorist groups that work and operate in parts of Africa, Middle East, and so forth, where they can simply adapt very cheap, off-the-shelf commercial technologies for great effect. One thinks here of commercial drones, chemical weapons, airborne IEDs, all of this. So the environment is very different. Secondly, the disinformation environment is hostile for Europeans when we deploy. The amount of fake news, the amount of cyber attacks, all of these forces conspire against the EU when we are deployed. And that is a fact of life that will increase for Europeans when they decide and if they decide to use force abroad. And it's also not easy because we know that in geographically central parts for Europe, in particular the Sahel, we know that long-standing partners like the US simply have little interest now. And that is borne by the fact that they focus more on China and the Indo-Pacific, of course. But without having that partner automatically with us, we have to do much more for our defense in those parts of the world. Now, even looking to the future, it will be important over the next few months and years to really make sure that the strategic compass, which has been announced, really delivers. And what do I mean by this? If the strategic compass is seen as simply another paper document or strategy document, we would have failed at something here. What is needed is to make sure that the compass, firstly, allows member states the possibility to exchange, for the first time, it must be said, on understanding what threats they face and how they can manage them together. That's not an easy conversation to have, but it should be had at the EU level. And it will, of course, raise all sorts of questions about geographical focus, and it will also raise serious questions about the nature of the transatlantic relationship as well. It should also be said then that the compass should do something very specific. What we have seen with the global strategy is that it is a grand strategy with not much operational information. We have also now developed projects under PESCO, EDF, which hints at the technology and capability side. But what we're missing in the landscape, in the thinking and the planning side of things, is how operationally we will use CSDP and European defense operations in the future for our own security needs. And it has to be a document which spells out in much more detail what is expected of the European Union, which I think would also have a positive messaging possibility for whoever will take up the presidency in the US, but also with our partners in NATO. And having that clarity, I think, is very, very important. And it also makes sure from the EU level that we can focus on the reality of improving capabilities and our ability to act, rather than just thinking in broader strategic terms. Now, I will just end by saying that there is good news and there is bad news on the horizon. When we think, for example, of strategic autonomy, everyone thinks of security and defense. And it's right to do this because that's where the concept was initially designed and developed and proliferated. But strategic autonomy applies to so much more in the European Union. And we sometimes lose sight of the fact that in many areas we actually do have a higher degree of autonomy than we expect. If you look at the single currency, that's one good example. I, for example, look at space, and that's one dimension where Europe at the moment has done extraordinarily well in having some degree of autonomy. And as we know, space being on the technological frontier, space being critical to society and to our economies, it is right that the Europeans have autonomy there. And it must be said that all of the flagship programs that we had, Galileo, Copernicus, the political tensions at the beginning when the Europeans said we wanted these programs, if we had listened to everyone else, we would never have developed them. But we persevered, and today we can say we have a degree of autonomy. But it also means that we cannot rest. We have to continue developing in new technologies to make sure that we maintain that autonomy. It's not something you have and hold forever. You can lose it also very, very easily. So that's very, very important. So when we talk of autonomy, we need to take a bit of a step back, I think, and to look at it in the broader perspective as well. The bad news, the pandemic. We simply don't know at the moment what hit this will have on our budgets, in particular our defense budgets. The Commission's autumn statement on the economy, which was published yesterday, I believe, did not make for pretty reading, I must say. And so in this context, we need to make sure that governments, member states recognize that this is not the time to be cutting defense budgets. This is the time to be investing in defense. And I very much echo what has already been said about connecting the dots between defense and other security domains, which is really important. We have to think in a more structured way for security and defense. So we have to maintain our defense budgets, security budgets. That for me is critical, because if it goes away, then any discussions about autonomy will simply be impossible. I would also say that the good news in all of this is that we don't have to invent any new initiatives. We have them. We have PESCO, we have EDF, CARD, all of these initiatives we have. So we need member states to simply use them and use them effectively. And the second bit of bad news, I guess, in COVID is that we simply do not know what knock-on effect it will have in our neighborhood in terms of crisis situations. So what happens in the case of long-term systemic economic fragility in Africa, in Middle East, North Africa? What knock-on effects will that have in terms of food security, in terms of people rallying, as they're already doing in some cases, against corruption and their governments? The potential for a further degradation of our security environment and neighborhood should not be underestimated. And we're still at the very early stages, I think, of understanding this. So even though when we have a pandemic, the natural reaction for governments is to cut budgets and to recoil behind borders, this is simply not time to do it. The time now is to make sure that we cooperate more on these issues and make sure that when we talk about strategic autonomy, that it has actually some meaning and has some resources and capabilities behind it. Otherwise, the risk is that it is simply words. And I can tell you, and I will end here, that none of our enemies, none of our adversaries will be deterred by words alone. So this is a core thing to keep in mind when we discuss strategic autonomy. Thank you once again for listening to me, and happy to have any kind of conversation that needs to be had. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for your presentation. It was highly interesting. And if I try to pick out two notions, it's on the one hand, your statement that Europe more or less lost its operational dimension. And I think this is a key word. I mean, an organization like EU, of course, does have automatically the tendency to be bureaucratic, to produce papers, to produce systems, and so on. And insofar, this concentration on the operational question, what can we really do, what can we effectively do, is so important. And the second one that I wanted to pick out was just the question of space. This certainly is underestimated all over Europe, and I think you pointed it out very clearly how important this question will be for the future. So thank you very much once again. Of course, we would have liked very much now to have a discussion between our four panelists, but we decided in a different way. Why? We decided, due to the actual situation, not to discuss now, but to have another presentation on the danger of terror. And we were able to win, I would say, the most outstanding Austrian expert, our colleague Stockhammer, and the director of our institute, Velina Čacharova, will introduce him, and I would ask you to come forward. And I thank Mikuláš, DZURINDA, Prime Minister and President, so much for your clear words, and I hope we will cooperate also in the future. Especially also Martens Center is a key institute in the further development, and I'm sure we will go side by side. And thank you also, Lukas, for your report, and we wish you all the best for your work in European Parliament on defense and security issues, and you can be sure we will back you. Thank you also the experts in United Kingdom and in France, because Europe is more than Austria, it's also more than France and more than United Kingdom or Germany. And insofar, thank you very much, and we will immediately start over. So we continue immediately in order not to lose time. Yeah. So
many thanks.
Super. Super.
Stay healthy.
Okay. So.
Ja, danke. Servus, hallo.
Du übernimmst gleich und gehen wir. So, bitte niedersetzen. Bitte niedersetzen, wir starten.
Please take your seats. We will immediately start with the next presentation.
Danke sehr, danke. Ja, okay, passt. Super. Danke dir.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you all. We have a very special guest with us today, Mr. Mikuláš Stockhammer. The occasion for this presentation is really a bad one. On Monday, a cruel terrorist attack happened in Vienna, and on Monday, a cruel terrorist attack happened in Vienna, and Dr. Stockhammer will focus on the topic of terrorism as a real threat. A few words on him. After successful PhD studies in political sciences in Vienna and the Humboldt University in Vienna, Dr. Stockhammer worked as a scientific researcher at the Humboldt University in Berlin, and
war professionell unterwegs und ist mittlerweile auch
has meanwhile become a senior postdoc researcher at the Institute of Legal Philosophy at the University of Vienna. Previously, he also worked as a scientific researcher of the Federal Ministry of Defense in Vienna. His activities focus, among others, on terrorism, geopolitics, and global order concepts. First of all, Mr. Stockhammer will give a short presentation, and afterwards I would like to talk with him about the terrorists, but also about the future risks resulting from this terrorist attacks. Thank you very much, Melina, for inviting me, which is a great honor for me, even though the occasion is not a happy one. For terrorism research, the attack didn't happen out of the blue. It's not by chance that Vienna has become the scene of a terrorist attack. It's also not by chance that this time was selected. I will also address these topical issues, but I have to ask you to be patient because I want to outline a development that resulted in current events. So there is a broader context that I would like to present. First of all, I would like to start with the situation before COVID-19. That is the situation in December 2019. It was assumed that the jihadist activities in Europe were going down. There were less terrorist attacks in European cities, but, and I have to mention this right away, the frequency of attacks was relatively stable since 2011 and 2012 as European countries were able to prevent actual attempts. So the caliphate in Syria and Iraq eroded, which resulted into an enormous operative weakening of the IISS as a terror militia. But starting in 2014-15, there was a spreading of splinter groups and apologies of IS throughout Europe. So IS sympathizers are living in Europe and also in Austria. Until December 2019, there was a dramatic decrease in online propaganda in the peak time of the IISS, when it still was expanding its territory. There was an incidence of 5 to 6 propaganda videos per day, while in the end of 2019 there were only 5 to 6 per week. So the IISS had experienced a decrease in attractiveness in the field of recruitment, so it was gradually weakened. Then we had the disruption of COVID-19. What did that affect? The attention moved away from terrorism among European security institutions. Resources were shifted so that terrorist organizations were able to consolidate. This is also noticeable for Al-Qaeda, which recovered especially in the outside of Europe. The same also applies to the IIS, which in the former caliphate and neighboring countries was able to re-establish itself. What is also interesting is the continuing problem of the return of fighters to Europe, even though it was halted by COVID-19. A backlog started to build up, so that in future foreign terrorist fighters will continue to return to their countries of origin in Europe. Since COVID-19, the propaganda has resurged, and the internet is the winner of the pandemic, if you allow me to formulate it in a provocative way. The attackers and assassins that have accompanied us since last year were radicalized on the internet. What is actually difficult, and which also mentioned by Secretary General Guterres, that potential attackers are becoming more active in the NBC field and use that for terrorist attacks. So the question is, are there parallels between COVID-19 and terrorism? And the answer is yes. Both pandemics, as I would like to call it, cause diffuse indiscriminative fear. Both pandemics thrive on contagion with the virus or with an ideology. Both pandemics challenge the trust of the public, the general public. They undermine our free democratic order. Both pandemics raise a democratic dilemma because states have to balance security and freedom. Both pandemics cause severe economic harm, and what is very important, and it's the perfect context to mention it is, and with regard to both pandemics, we need international cooperation. They can only be eradicated in collaboration. We need sound findings. You need to gather, analyze, and process information in order to draw useful conclusions. For both pandemics, we also have to mobilize the general public to fight against the pandemics. with regard to COVID-19, you need to win the public in order for them to wear masks. And for the terrorism, we need people to report their observations to the police and the other authorities. But there is also a difference between the two pandemics. Transnational terrorism is man-made, whereas COVID-19 is not a man-made pandemic, according to current information. What are the geopolitical drivers of terrorism? I want to briefly outline them. First of all, terrorism thrives on the failed states in the Middle East. Secondly, terrorism has a substantial relation to the reduction of the involvement of the US in the greater military East. Third, terrorism could also increase due to a potential resurgence of international Palestinian terrorism. Fourth, the question of the Chinese Uyghurs and its international impact is important. The Transcaucasian security dilemma has not been resolved. A retreat of the US from Afghanistan would have an impact, just like any kind of US military campaign against Iran. Furthermore, you must not only see the jihadist dimension, we also have to expect a resurgence of a left-wing extremist violence. And last but not least, there is an insecurity, uncertainty with regard to the counterterrorism approach of the next US administration. Before talking about the terrorist attack of Vienna, an outlook, we presume that the prevailing dynamism will intensify and accelerate. That means that current trends will aggravate. The main trend is the hybridization of terrorism. This means that terrorism abandons new premises so that we face new developments that benefits from the multidimensional conflicts. So then there is a massive connection between conflicts and terrorism. Third, COVID-19 will result in a progressing polarization of society. Some already speak about an erosion of the social cohesion, which would also have an impact on radicalization potential. The role of the internet becomes more and more important. You can see that at the micro level. Not only office workers spend more time on the internet, but also terrorists. And on a systemical, tactical level, terrorism will be heavily shaped by variants of the lone wolves. That is, we will see many individual attackers and assassins, but it cannot be excluded that cells will become reactivated, but for the next foreseeable future, the lone wolves will prevail. There is also a connection between crime and terrorism. During the past 5 years, jihadists were active as petty criminals before their terrorist activities. A radical change, that is something I understand under hybrid terrorism, is that extremist ideologies and religious misinterpretations will not be the sole carrier of terrorist violence. What is relevant for Vienna is that we see a loose franchise structure for terrorist conspiracies. Terrorists will not be radicalized within Islam, but towards Islam. So the question of political Islam will not be the main question, but the implications. So we have to change our understanding. We have to think about which people form part of these societies. If they do not want to form part of our society, what does it mean for us? Islam is the stepping stone for future attacks. In this context, we will see a further spiral of violence, also on the right wing, extremism, because this is related to Islamist terror. So now the first lessons learned from the terrorist attack in Vienna. We see, I've already mentioned that, a new phenomenon that became apparent in the past 1 or 2 years. That's the lone wolf plus. We see persons who start to become active operatively alone, but they use and get support in planning, logistics, and with regard to ideology, and then become active in this greater context. There are transnational networks all over Europe. The current case shows links to the Balkans, to Switzerland, to Germany, and even further. So there are transnational networks that cross borders. Moreover, there are changes with regard to the modus operandi. We observe a jihadistic order tactics. That's a principle where the military leader gives orders but leaves maximum flexibility to the soldiers on site. So we see a selection of scenes. It was not a coincidence that the synagogue in Seitenstedtengasse was selected. And we see the Mumbai scheme, rapid-fire arms, even though it seems that there was only one person. I assume that there were supporters on site. And the internet as a site for implementation, from the idea to the implementation, either by providing inspiration, conspiracy, or there is an increase in terrorism. It started with the publication of the Charlie Hebdo caricatures in autumn, where a fatwa was issued in France, where a French teacher was beheaded in Paris. It continued in Dresden with long firearms and knives, and only a few days in Nice. I wrote an op-ed in a Austrian daily where I tried to anticipate the forthcoming attacks. I was shocked that Vienna was selected, that it happened in Vienna. Why was that so? The reason is that the attacker grew up in Austria, was familiar with the environment here. The strategic question is whether there were any instructions from outside for selecting Vienna as the scene of the terrorist attacks. Jihadis call Europe the soft belly that needs to be attacked. This, of course, highly topical for Vienna, because Vienna has always been oriented to have as little police present in the public space as a reflection of our free democratic order. I assume that this will change in future, and police persons are omnipresent in Vienna in the past few days. What are the consequences? It may, why did the attack happen right now? Maybe because of the forthcoming COVID restrictions or a forthcoming raid. Various overall, I assume that the terrorist attack was moved forward for various reasons, practical reasons. What are the consequences? We have seen that there are structural deficits in counterterrorism, especially not only here in Austria, but also elsewhere. What is the use of de-radicalization programs? How and are potential terrorists supervised? What is the international practice? Next question is, did information flows work out well between authorities? As we know so far, there were mistakes, as has been admitted by the Minister of the Interior yesterday. And another lesson is that the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution and Counterterrorism is a major construction site, and I think that great improvements are needed here. My last point is that we need an integrated counterterrorism. All the stakeholders in the field of security need to be networked, and we also need an internationally networked cooperation. Solution for Austria could be to have a joint counterterrorism center, as it exists in Germany, and in order to ensure that information such as the one on the attempt to buy ammunition in Slovakia is passed on a timely basis. Just one brief question, as you have presented a good summary. Do you think that there will be a coordinated European response? We have already heard from French President Macron, we had Chancellor Kurz, that they want to put counterterrorism on the agenda of the European summit meetings. Just a brief answer. Of course, it would be good if counterterrorism would be lifted to a joint initiative between heads of government, or even to the EU level. At the EU level, we already have joint common approaches, but in practice, counterterrorism has always been a national affair. But it would be good to have an international solution with boots on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. At the same time, we would like to announce that you will have an opportunity to also discuss this issue with Dr. Stockhammer next Wednesday, if you're here, the 11th of November at 4 p.m., because our IISS talk will be held here, and we will deal with the issue of international and national terrorism for 1 hour. So if you want to participate, you are cordially invited to also follow this event, and you will receive an invitation to this event. We will now continue immediately with our next item on the agenda and our next speaker. Our next speaker will be Mr. Bogdan Klich from Poland.
So I use the opportunity, as long as Bogdan Klich is trying to take his seat, in order to present a little bit his personal story. Bogdan Klich was born 1960 in Krakow. He studied medicine, art, history of art, and history of philosophy. And of course, occupied himself more or less for quite some time already with security and defense questions. In the last 20 years, he used to be in very responsible positions concerning security and defense in Poland. He started out as a deputy defense minister in 1999. Then he was a member of the Polish parliament in the Committee for Foreign and Security Policy and so on. And then between 2007 and 2011, he was the defense minister of Poland. And you can imagine, since then, he is a senator of the Polish Senate. So you can imagine that he has not only theoretical, but also very much practical experience in security and defense. And yeah, we want to ask you just to give us an overview about the security challenges.
Thank you very much, Werner, for this invitation. This is my third visit here to IISS and the opportunity to share some of my experiences and my findings, you know, with this distinguished audience, but also to take part in this exchange of views with the others. First of all, very deep condolences because of what's happened here in Vienna. I carefully looked at the reaction of Austrian enforcement institutions and mainly at the police reaction. It was great, it was immediate, great, and it was comprehensive. So from that point of view, although there were victims, but also there was a good reaction of the enforcement institutions. What could be my reaction to the former panelist and his great presentation? It would be the idea of including into the conference on the future of Europe also counter-terrorism issue. Counter-terrorism issue, because at the European level, we have still the same system that was set up many years ago. And since 2015, at least 2015, we have a new chapter in the history of international terrorism. Mainly, this is the chapter of lone wolves. So it would be also important to reshape the current counterterrorism system within the European Union, that is based on the assumption that the counterterrorism activity is mainly in the hands of national government, plus integrated forms of cooperation on the European level. Why not to raise the issue of including this counterterrorism into the agenda of the European Union and create not intergovernmental but community responsibility for that? Yes, of course, it would be connected with the revision of the treaty. It would be necessary to revise the treaty. But in such a situation that we are during the next wave of terrorist attacks, it should be taken into consideration by the leaders of the EU and once again included into the agenda of the future conference on the future of Europe. But returning to this main point that I was asked to deliver, I mean the current and future situation of European defense and security capabilities, I would like to begin with what's happened before 2016. Before 2016, we had the first declarations of Donald Trump that were introduced then into his political vocabulary as the President of the United States, undermining the political cohesion of the alliance. Then it proved that during both summits, I mean the Warsaw Summit and the Brussels Summit in 2018, fortunately, military cohesion of the alliance wasn't undermined. So we had the paradoxical situation in which there was a split between political lack of cohesion and military cohesion. When we take into consideration, for example, implementation of the concept of the enhanced forward presence in Central European countries on the eastern flank of the alliance, this process went smoothly. And I can confirm that not only as a Polish politician, but also as a representative of the opposition in Poland. We were satisfied of the implementation of the enhanced forward presence in my country and the territories of our neighbors. That's first. Secondly, we had, after this new approach to Europe presented by President Trump, and after the tensions between Washington and Berlin, Washington and Paris, we had the revival of the European thinking about autonomy, European autonomy, but also the presentation of new concepts that were answers not only for this new approach of the American administration, but also for what's happened in Europe. I mean Brexit and the results of British referendum. We had in Europe to think about the future of the relationship between main partners in Europe. That's why not only the concept of European army returned, but also the President Macron delivered in the speech in which he presented two ideas of the European Security Council and European Security and Defense Treaty. I heard that in the publication and in this report of the Euro Defense that you presented today, there was also the reference to this idea of the European Security Council. So these were products of this new situation between Washington and Brussels, between Washington and the main capital cities of the European Union, and also of this new situation between relationship between London and the rest of the European Union. But we had also the the renovation of CSDP. And it was a good sign. It was a good sign because at least as far as I see European capabilities, European, then common security and defense policy of the European Union is of the utmost importance for the future of Europe. And this is one of the pillars of European ability to react and of the cohesion, of the potential cohesion of the European response to crisis management. From that point of view, such initiatives like European Global Strategy that was finally adopted in June 2016, and its implementation plan together with the European Defence Action Plan presented by the European Commission at the end of 2016, they marked the beginning of the recovery of CSDP after the crisis that we witnessed between 2008 and 2016. It was the longest crisis of European capabilities within the CSDP framework since the Iraqi crisis in 2003. So fortunately, European Union was able to begin this process of recovery. And those institutions mentioned here during the first session, I mean permanent structured cooperation, the newly created European Defence Fund, but also the progress of European Defence Agency. Let's remember about that development, but also the creation of CARD, Coordinated Annual Review on Defense. These were good signs, political signs, not only technical signs of this recovery, but political signs of the willingness of European Union to push ahead this tool. I mean this common security and defense policy. Currently, we have the beginning of crisis of CSDP. Because reviewing, the project, the draft budget for 2021 that was presented this summer, we can see that in the chapter number 5, Resilience, Security and Defense, comparing with the year 2020, we have the reduction of funds allocated for both commitments and payments, around 50% as for the first issue, I mean commitments, and around 33% as for payments are taken into consideration. It will mean that without funds, neither European Defence Fund nor other issues, nor other instruments of the common security and defense policy will not be possible to work effectively. And we are in favor of effectiveness of CSDP. If we use those instruments, those tools that were incorporated into the Lisbon Treaty in 2009, and finally we decided to move them, to push them ahead, it is necessary, it is absolutely necessary to allocate sufficient fund to make them working. This danger is still visible because in September this year the Council proposed to reduce the commitments again of around half a billion euros. And payments of about 1 billion or even more, 1 billion euros per next year. So one could say that without necessary funds, CSDP could be a victim of both coronavirus first and the next austerity policy concerning connected with the new commitments of the European Union connected with necessity of rebuilding Europe after coronavirus epidemics. So this is the main question as for my understanding of the future of CSDP, how the CSDP will be supported by, how the intentions, the aims will be supported by financial means necessary to develop CSDP and to achieve necessary goals. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bogdan Klic, for your presentation and also for speaking out very clearly the dimension of the financial dimension. Of course, this is an integral, not only an integral part, but a decisive factor for developing European security and defense capabilities, also to provide enough budgets in order to develop them. Thank you so much. And I can see that already our next speaker is already present in the room. Please, Dr. Martin Seidig, if you take a seat at the panel. And I just want to introduce Dr. Seidig, but I will do it maybe, I guess, Martin, you will speak in German. Or
was immer.
Ja.
Deutsch oder auf Englisch?
In Deutsch,
okay.
Ja. Dr. Seidig
ist
1949 in Wien
was born in Vienna in 1949. He studied here right in this building. He also studied law in Vienna and international law at the Lomonosov University of Moscow. He engaged in a career first in the business sector. Then he was an envoy, an Austrian envoy to the Soviet Republic, followed by his work as an Austrian ambassador in Beijing, Austrian ambassador to the United Nations, and head of Division for European Integration at the Austrian Ministry of the Interior. He also, in the recent years, between 2015 and 2020, he was a special envoy of the OECD for Ukraine and the Donbas conflict. So he's certainly one of the diplomats, Austrian diplomats, with the richest and widest experience in the field of Eastern Europe. Dear Martin, the floor is yours. Dear Werner, thank you very much for your kind introductory words. I'm just back from a very interesting meeting.
Ich komme gerade von einem sehr interessanten Treffen mit
with
weißrussischen Oppositionellen.
Representatives of the Belarusian opposition who live in Vienna, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and Mr. Tsakalo, and representatives of Mr. Babariko, who is, of course, right now in under arrest. Also Mr. Latushto, who is in Warsaw and is COVID positive and therefore cannot come to Vienna. So I will not speak about this meeting because this was, of course, a secret meeting. Basically, the results are not supposed to get out there. But talking about Belarus, Russia, then we have to look at the map. Where's the country located? and what's its history. It's much too easy to say, well, it's always been part of Russia. No, it wasn't. It's the same thing as Ukraine. Ukraine wasn't always part of Russia. These lands were part of Europe, parts of the Polish, of the Lithuanian state. Which was very influential and certainly stood for Central European values in that region. So this is, I think, a joint legacy that we feel and that is felt if you have to do with the people. So Belarus is currently living a very, very delicate situation, a difficult situation, and the future of the country, well, where does the country belong? This is a question that is an issue that is not only currently discussed in the country itself, but also in many circles in the European Union. However, I did not come to speak about that issue, but rather, I would like to return to what Werner Fassler said regarding my curriculum. I was, as you heard, Austrian ambassador to China, People's Republic of China. Why do I return to this this position of mine? Living in the country, I had the possibility to talk to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And you will, perhaps will ask, what's it got to do with us today? It's a lot to do with us, because the original members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is based on a treaty of 1996, the original Shanghai 5 was based on a deepening military trust between Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Russia, and China. These 5. Now, if you ask, what's that? What's it to do with Europe? A lot, for 2 reasons. Talking about Belarus and its geography, we must not forget that to the northwest of the country, there's Kaliningrad, a Russian enclave, and situated between Poland and Lithuania. And transit to Kaliningrad is via Lithuania. The entire infrastructure, railways, etc., if it's not via sea. So, talking about the Shanghai Cooperation Treaty and Organization, we must not forget that part of the territory that we're talking about is right here in Europe, Kaliningrad. Don't forget that. It's not far away, somewhere in Central Asia. No. It's Europe. And
Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Belarus has observer status in the organization, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and therefore changes in Belarus will also have an effect on the future of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and its future. As I said, originally it was 5 countries, and of course the idea was to start a more pacific development along the border between Russia and China, and it was successful in the beginning. Later, Uzbekistan joined as well, and in 1997, there was a declaration involving Yeltsin and Jiang Zemin regarding a multipolar world within the context of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We talk about multipolarism, polarity in this world, and in 1997, Jiang Zemin and Yeltsin already talked about that over 20 years ago, and there was a declaration on this issue. within the context of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization 23 years ago. And this organization is growing geographically. So it's no longer 6 countries, originally 5 plus then Uzbekistan. No. In 2015, India, Pakistan also joined the organization. And what's interesting about it is that this organization is widening its geographical, geopolitical influence. For example, Israel, Turkey are dialogue partners of the organization. Qatar and Bahrain have also submitted applications for membership. And other countries with observer status are Iran and Mongolia. It's well known that Russia is highly interested in having Iran join the organization as well.
Auf unserer gemeinsamen euroasiatischen Landmasse.
And all this is on the Euro-Asian, the Eurasian continent, of which Kaliningrad too is a part, and Kaliningrad is at the heart of Europe. So we can't say it doesn't touch us. No doubt, the organization is not perhaps very effective, because there are conflicts between India and Pakistan regarding the Kashmir region. And there was a conflict with dozens of dead between India and China. But the fact remains that this organization exists and that it is growing. Does not only discuss military issues, but the organization also is highly interested in security and common counter-terrorism activities and anti-extremism activities. So that's, I think, an important aspect for China, extremism, because China also, for example, China's way of dealing with the minorities in Xinjiang is also something that touches on the extremism issue. And therefore, it's Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, the neighboring states, should always be directly involved. And after all, the organization has been in existence for 24 years. And as I said, Mongolia is also an observer in the organization. So that's quite important. There are military exercises carried out regularly within the organization, involving thousands of soldiers. So far, these military exercises were concentrated only to the original Shanghai Five, but who knows how the future will be and how this organization will evolve. And we as Europeans must not look away. We must be aware that something like that exists. And the question is this an alternative, or is this organization undermining OECD? Because Central Asia is part of it. Turkmenistan is not part of it, I must say, is an observer with some distance, but Azerbaijan and Armenia are dialogue partners of the organization, and also Turkey, which is a member of NATO. In 2005, the US wanted to become an observer, but was rejected. So in 2005, the Americans probably realized quite correctly that's an important organization that is evolving. So we as Europeans should be aware that this Euro-Asian continent is developing And we must not close our eyes to it or remain passive or indifferent, just saying, oh, it's so far away, we're not interested. Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Cambodia. No, this is too far away. No, again, also Kaliningrad, and Belarus, part of Europe. So this is something we should not forget and consider. Cooperation on economic issues and banking issues within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is not highly developed so far, that's true. And Russia, China, and India do cooperate within as part of the BRIX 5. That is South Africa and Brazil, plus these three countries. And I noticed it very strongly when working for the United Nations that these 5 BRICS countries do have a very close cooperation. And 3 of them are part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And military and security cooperation is an important element of this organization. Also, don't forget, with India and China as members, and Russia, it's nearly half of the world's population that is a member. So we must not close our eyes as Europeans. And we should also look at OECD. OECD is headquartered in Vienna, as you know, and the organization is living a big crisis right now, not only a crisis of personnel, that they need new personnel. OECD is also living a crisis of identity. But how important it is and what role it plays through its institutions. That's something that becomes also very visible. If you look at the U.S. elections, the OECD observer at the U.S. elections commented on the elections and how he commented Trump's statements about the progress of the election. So OECD is present in the United States. And it is also an organization that represents common values. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization perhaps also represents common values, but these values are certainly not identical to those of the OECD. So we are certainly interested, based on the final act of Helsinki, we are interested that on this enormous Eurasian continent, which reaches to Mongolia, that this organization should be working. Mongolia is also a member of OECD. This is really also in an Austrian interest, and not only as the headquarters of OECD, but also it's a part of the common European interest. I hope that the next Secretary General of OECD, hopefully, will be the EU diplomat Helga Schmidt. I hope so. If this is the case, then we will have an OECD that will be more weighty in the future. This too is in our interest as the Republic of Austria, not only as headquarters, but also as a member of the European Union. So we have to face the new developments and must not always get stuck looking at ourselves, gazing our navels, but we have to look around what's happening in the world, because the just Shanghai Cooperation Organization, just is taken as an example, and the developments in Belarus and the interconnections that I see here, for all these reasons, I think it's impossible to look at these things and not only say, okay, this is happening far away in Asia. We Austrians too have to face this issue much more strongly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your presentation, in which you clearly outlined how necessary it is that we focus on the developments in our neighborhood, not only with regard to security developments in the field, but also with political developments. When today the whole world discusses the rise of China and the potential decline of the US, or at least a reduction of its influence, we get a new situation, a new global situation. We can see by the area highlighted by you, similar things arise in the field of the security in an organization initiated by Europe, Russia, and the US is maybe undermined, and this means that we must not only think in conventional areas and structures, but that we have to go beyond that. Therefore, I'm very happy that Mr. Sadiq arrived at the same conclusions as we did. The AIES paid a visit to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization last year. We also had a visit of the Secretary General of this organization at our institute. So I consider it very important not only to observe the developments, but also to build bridges and engage in a dialogue. And in order to follow this development very closely. Thank you very much. We are moving on to for this round, we will move on to the last round.
The last round, and I ask the two military men, Reisner and Fuste, to take place at the panel. Thank you. In the meantime, I will just present a little the two speakers. I start with Markus Reisner. He was born 1978 in Lower Austria, and he went to the military academy, and then ja, ich kann es auch auf Deutsch machen.
Can also speak German. He had various missions abroad in the Balkans, in Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo, but also in Afghanistan, furthermore in Africa, in Chad and the Central African Republic, and he took the General Staff course and is now responsible for science and research at the Terrorism Military Academy in Wiener Neustadt. We will present the next speaker. First of all, I would like to ask Markus Reisner for his words, for his statement. He's a drone expert, if you permit me to say so. He was actually one of the very first, not only in Austria, but all over Europe, who wrote about the first drone war. And we are, of course, also very interested in this technological dimension. Thank you very much for the friendly introduction. I'm very happy and pleased to be able in this illustrious round. I've also brought along a short presentation. What I would like to do is the following. The previous speakers have often mentioned crises and buzzwords crisis, understanding crisis starts with being directly affected by a crisis, because it means that things that seem to be remote become relevant, not only for a country like Austria or the European Union. What I want to do in the next few minutes, I would like to raise these concerns with a focus on the technological developments that we see all over the world, and which will be important for Europe in the next few years and the decades. And here I would like to give you an impression of a few developments that are important from a military perspective. And we have already heard that the military is a technology driver. What you see here was a very important event that we had this summer in August, where emerging technology, and it's about artificial intelligence and autonomous systems, where DARPA was founded as a response to Sputnik in order to progress technological development. And this organization said if this development continues and leads to autonomous armed systems, let's look at an example. And what happens when we eliminate pilots, where they demonstrated that machines are better than humans in air strikes. This means that the armaments race is coming back. And ARPANET shows that the US, China, and also Russia work hard to get control of these emerging technologies. Another aspect that illustrates how these technologies can be implemented in combat is a disruptive development, a drone, as it is shown in this picture, a DP2 drone. Turkey was enabled by this technology to dominate war scenes, not only in Turkey itself, in the combat, in the fight against terrorist organizations, but also Syria, Nagorno-Karabakh, Libya, where the deployment of such drones allowed Turkey to influence events very much. And when we think of those successes in the past few months in Libya, Nagorno-Karabakh, and Syria, we should look ahead to the future. This system was also delivered to Ukraine, and there is an emerging cooperation between Ukraine and Turkey. And in view of the successes achieved by Turkey, this may be a sign that we will see an escalation in the east of Ukraine in the foreseeable future. To make that even more concrete, so that you get a picture, I took along this picture from Nagorno-Karabakh, where in the past few weeks weapon systems were used that were only familiar from theory, that is the use of drone systems, not only in the form of the Bayraktar, a drone that carries along air-to-ground missiles, but also swarms of drones. You can see that in this picture that there is an explosion cloud hiding a target that was hit by the targeting in the red circle. You see a kamikaze drone that is on its way to find a target. On the right-hand side, on the right-hand top, you see that there is a battery of drones. You will realize that the conflict party is superior, and the Armenian forces have twice double or three times as lost drones that would amount to 3 times the equipment of the Austrian army. So these emerging technology and the availability of drones gives rise to an asymmetry, giving an enormous advantage to one party to the conflict, which could also be greatly to the disadvantage of Europe. But not only state actors use those systems, but also non-state actors realize increasingly that drones are of great importance. The Islamic State was one of the actors that used drones, so to speak, as the Air Force of the poor man. You can see here that police found a drone in Europe that was being prepared for carrying explosive that dramatically changes the situation because it gives terrorist organizations to increase their capacity. And the question is whether we are able to protect our population in these fields, especially considering that drones are difficult to detect. If we go further into details, it's not only worrying that technological developments move in that direction, but also with regard to artificial intelligence. It's not only the military thinking about its use, but we are all victims of artificial intelligence, because what you see on your smartphones is prepared very well in advance. When you Google something, you will get personalized results. So in fact, artificial intelligence, and here we have to ask who is behind the artificial intelligence. You will we have to ask ourselves whether there is intensive work going on with a view to hybrid warfare, and there are hidden weaknesses that we may not even be aware of, and that should be countered. The next example is in the field of hybrid threats is, of course, cyber attacks, blackouts, pandemics are things that are very abstract for the population. And when there is, you can quickly see our limits and where European solidarity ends, and that international actors take targeted steps. You can see transport aircrafts of the Russian air forces. You may not have heard that a convoy of vehicles going to Bergamo in Italy to build a military field hospital. When you would have seen Russian TV, you would have been surprised to hear what they think of our ability to manage the crisis. I did not discuss my presentation with the other panelists, but also a central aspect of my presentation is the EU strategy. And it's very clear that Europe in this multipolar world clearly has to expand its role in the technology field. Austria is a high-tech country. If we need to protect something in Austria, need to protect our ability to influence the development in the high-tech sector. There are many measures we need to take, but what is needed to promote those developments are that we need to be aware that this crisis concerns us all. So I'm convinced that in the medium term, we in Europe are able to take the right decisions in order to master the new technologies. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much for your presentation of a military instrument that is gaining an importance in the future. In conflict zones, this is already noticeable. I've mentioned I think one number of times an experience I had 3 years ago. I met Peshmerga troops in Iraqi Kurdistan, and the local commander there, when I asked them what are the most important military elements, mentioned the following 3 elements: snipers, tunnels, and drones. Snipers, tunnels, and drones. This, we have to be aware of the fact that fighting things has changed a great deal, and this is happening in many battlegrounds. But with still things in categories of perhaps the Second World War and other classic wars, so to speak, traditional wars, but the developments are moving in different direction. And this is where we have our next speaker, Wolfgang Pustein. He is also a person who has enjoyed an in-depth military training, not only in Austria, but also internationally. He studied at the military academy here in Austria, Wiener Neustadt, but also the National Defense Academy in the United States, where he graduated as the best in class. He also was part of many international missions. He was chief of staff for Althea in Bosnia-Herzegovina, so he really knows what he's talking about. He was military attaché in Italy, for Italy, Greece, Tunisia, and Libya, and has also become an international specialist in the field of MENA, Middle East, Northern Africa. In particular, with regard to Syria, has also acted as a consultant to and advisor to the United States. And he's also heard in Brussels by various political authorities and bodies. Dear Wolfgang Pustein, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, President, for these nice words. As the last speaker at this event, I would like to say a few words regarding the reality of the security policy challenges. What right now right now, the visibility of various countries, we have, of course, we always a lot of positive words, what is happening, but I must say what is really happening. Of course, I felt there the oldest mission is certainly always necessary, but what is its contribution to stability in the country? What can it do in order to contain political Islam in Bosnia and Herzegovina? EUFOR for Atalanta is extremely successful because the number of pirate attacks is close to zero. What is less effective are the training missions. Somalia is active since 2010. But it is no longer very influential as compared to a Turkish training mission, which is much more efficient because it's 300 people, 300 troops, and that also provides equipment. The training mission to the Central African Republic exists since 2016. And is not successful at all because the country has turned to Russia for mercenaries, and 1,400 mercenaries are there. The Russians train them, equip them, and assist them. They also provide them with armored cars and also cooperation with the United Nations. The training mission to Mali exists since 2013. The security situation in the country is getting worse and worse. Burkina Faso and Niger are also involved in the terror scene in the region. So the training mission has practically no practical effects on the ground. Last year in Africa, I talked to Americans and French people who were serving north of the country, and they said that this mission is just a waste of resources. France tries to motivate more and more European countries to participate in the national Operation Barkhane, because Barkhane directly fights terrorism. 9 European countries are or will participate in the task force Takuba, which serves the same purpose in the area in Mali. This includes Sweden and Czech Republic. Germany provides political assistance. Now let's look to Libya. The border assistance mission exists since 2013, but has no practical relevance in Tunisia. It's a sitting duck, so to speak. EUFOR Sophia was called into life in May 2015 when the Italian carrier was first activated to destroy the traffickers' business model. We know the results. EUFOR Irini was created this year in order to give weight to the sanctions in the sea. But in June, the Turkish Navy prevented an Emirate tanker to be controlled by the European ships. The European Union threatened sanctions because for that, and in the course of time, unfortunately, has ignored further shipments of arms, Turkish shipments of arms in the area. They did stop one Emirate tanker and found out that this ran contrary to against the sanctions, and this is interpreted by Turkey that the European Union is afraid of Turkey because nothing is done against Turkish shipments. So I can say that EU missions very often don't have this effect. The effect that is intended, and they should be reassessed. What about the battle groups? Battle groups exist since 2015. 25, and Austrians too are active in standby. These battle groups are partly very costly. There are training and exercise platform for the military. It certainly makes sense, but what is their effect to the outside world? What message do we communicate? Talking to influential people in Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, US, I've talked to so many people about the purpose of the use of battle groups in Libya. but most people don't even know about their existence. So there is no practical effect, and the battle groups have never been actually used. But of course, a security policy is more than a military instrument of power. It is also about the coordinated use of diplomatic, informational, and economic instruments. So these possibilities also exist. By summary, I can say that the EU has a problem of credibility. Very often there are empty threats. There are missions that have no effect. There are political statements that are not followed up. And apart from the problem of credibility, there's also the problem of different interests. But it is all about interests. This is a slogan of a strategy. Strategy and politics of international players are driven by interests. Clearly identified common interests are very often, too often, not the driving factors of a security policy of the European Union, shared security policy. But if the interests do not converge, nothing happens. Very often, nothing happens. So we have to understand the hierarchy of these interests. We have to ask ourselves, there are security interests, and they are more important than any others. Then, of course, there are economic interests at the second level, and only if these two interests are met, then we can talk about the preservation of shared values and promotion of shared values. This is not a priority. Of course, the EU is a community of values, it's true, but this does not drive security policy. National security and economic interests are very often given greater priority, and we have to accept that. This, of course, often leads to a European common interest policy of the smallest common denominator. Two examples: France versus India. For Italy, in Libya, is especially interested in the containment of migration, economic interests, so they focus on the west of the country. And therefore, Italy supports the governments in Tripolis. For France, however, security interests for the Sahel zone is more important. Therefore, is France especially interested in counterterrorism with a view to southern Sahara, so as not to endanger the uranium mines in Niger. So they support the Libyan National Army to the east. And therefore, there is no common position within the European Union. And then there is, of course, a deep distrust of Italy vis-à-vis France and vice versa regarding the intentions, the other countries' intentions. Politically influential people told me last year, well, the problem in Libya is due to the French. It's the fault of the French, because they created the crisis in order to weaken the Italian position in the country. But in the eastern Mediterranean, different interests create problems for the European Union. For example, on the one hand, France, Greece, Cyprus versus Germany regarding Turkey. Greece and Cyprus are mainly interested toward of territorial claims of Turkey, security interests. For France, Turkey is considered a promoter of political Islam, and is therefore an adversary in Africa. And for Germany, Germany is mainly interested in migration, warning of migration, and also keeping Turkey a country of destination for the German arms industry. And all this has motivated Erdogan to say that European Union should be neutral in its conflicts, in Turkey's conflicts with two other states. So Europe is not taken seriously as a security policy player. And at the same time, of course, there is a self-blocking of the European Union via sanctions. For example, support for one side while offering sanctions to the other side. Libya is an example. the president of House of Representatives, Sud-Est, Aguilar Saleh, was submitted to sanctions for years. And I was asked in Brussels, okay, the EU wants to mediate, but who should they talk to? I said, well, General Hefter is excluded for various reasons. The second person you could talk to, Saleh, is under sanctions, so who do you want to talk to? So sanctions should not block us, because this would very often hinder us to become active in a region. Another point, neglecting the common security policy is very dangerous and opens opportunities for other players. European countries are regarded as main drivers of international intervention in Libya. After the successful intervention in 2011, there was no follow-up. This, on the part, on one hand, is the fault of Libya, but it's also the fault of the international community, also Europe, because we showed no interest in becoming active with the state-building mission in Libya. So, if for what reason or whatever you want to keep out of a conflict in the neighborhood, you will have to live with the result. And the result is very negative in Libya. The EU has found no way to contain the crisis in Libya. In view of the EU interests in Libya and the closeness of the country to Europe, the EU was always very passive and relied on the United Nations, which still follows the Skirat process, an erroneous process, and they're still continuing with this process and the errors of the past. Now the EU is in a situation that we find a way to mitigate the negative effects of a continuing Turkish and Russian presence in Libya. The presence of Turkey in Libya has had several negative effects for the European Union. Maritime agreement is regarded a case of precedence for the exclusion of economic zones, exclusive economic zones in the area. Then, of course, also Turkey wants to dominate in the petroleum business. It wants to drive out European companies in the field of construction, health industry, energy, for example. Russia controls the gas deliveries to Italy via the Green Stream pipeline. They control migration routes. And I've heard they're also preparing Libya as a basis for further expansion of Turkey in the Sahara region. So the French are not amused. We should also not forget that the presence of Turkey and the Muslim Brotherhood, which is supported by Turkey, now have a lot of access to extensive financial resources. So with Turkey, we have the problem that we're acting at different level. Turkey uses the military instrument of power actively, aggressively. The European Union does not want to parallel this. We'll have to find workarounds, for example, economic embargoes. The drones that have been mentioned are, for example, driven by by Austrian motors. The most important drone of the Turkish military is in the air because they receive motors from Austria. So what can we do for a more effective European security policy? There is no panacea, but we could try to identify common interests with a view to various conflict hotbeds. Because in crisis, it's not about big fleets or big troops. It's not so much about PESCO or battle groups or new structures. I think it's about fine-tuning concrete interests regarding concrete centers of conflicts, individual centers of conflicts. And security policy is therefore a question of true willingness and deployment of available means and resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you. From me as well, I think this was a fitting conclusion of today's European Forum, a clear picture of the situation in Europe's environment. And this also means that it's a call upon us to do much more in order to live up to the challenges. And what seems to be very important to me is not only the open language, but also a clear analysis of how difficult it is in Europe to find a common interest that may not, because the interests of big states are not in conformity, but often counter each other. This brings us to the point that we should reflect more on the smaller states. If in in critical situations, Germany, Italy, and France cannot agree, it's all the more important that the small and medium-sized countries also become drivers of a common policy in order to achieve common European objective. I should like to thank all the speakers, especially the members of the last panel, Ambassador Sadik, Mr. Bogdan Klic, and Markus Reisner and Wolfgang Pusta. I would like to thank all those who listened in to us for the amount of concentration and focus you mustered. I'm sure that it was worthwhile because we all learned something. This brings to the end. I would like to thank the Diplomatic Academy for their hospitality, to our interpreters, to the team creating the technical conditions, and the team of the AIES under the directorship of Melinda Sakharova. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the next event and to meeting you again.